Welcome everyone. Welcome to the Observatorio of the Spanish Language and Hispanic Cultures in the United States. Welcome to this Instituto Cervantes at Harvard University, and welcome to this Teaching Foreign Languages workshop. This is the first Observatorio's event in this 5th year of activities in the Cervantes Institute at Harvard University. We feel very happy for having new opportunities to host a bunch of events, workshops and activities regarding the Spanish language, the Hispanic cultures, and the United States, and also training for teachers. I think I met previously most of you, but in case not, my name is Francisco Moreno Fernandez. I am Executive Director of the Instituto Cervantes at Harvard. Many of you know what is the Observatorio and what is the Instituto Cervantes, and what we are doing here. But let me say a few words about Instituto Cervantes and about this Observatorio at Harvard. Cervantes Institute, or Instituto Cervantes in Spanish, is a worldwide non-profit organization created by the Spanish government in 1991. It is the largest organization in the world concerned with the teaching of Spanish. The mission of the Instituto Cervantes is to promote the teaching, study, and use of Spanish as a second language, and to foster Spanish and Latin American cultures throughout speaking Spanish countries. So the mission of the Instituto Cervantes in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences in Harvard University is to offer a program of projects, events, activities for the analysis, reflection, and discussion of the presence of the Spanish language in the United States. Among other activities, the Observatorio hosts the Spanish exams, the DELE exams, the Diploma de Español como Lengua Extranjera, the exams for Spanish citizenship, and we also organize workshops and courses for teachers of foreign languages, especially for teachers of Spanish. So the collaboration with, of the Observatorio with the seminar of teaching Spanish as a heritage language, coordinated by Harvard professor Maria Luisa Parra, is especially well appreciated by us. By the way, next Thursday, September 14, we have the open house of the Observatorio. We will have an explanation of the activities we are organizing for this year, and we will have also a Son of Flamenco by Javier Limón. It's a small show called Flamenco from Origins to Garcia Lorca. So you all are invited to this open house, including wine and tapas. And finally, regarding specifically teaching of Spanish as a heritage language, we may boast about having in this same classroom all the main experts in heritage language in the United States. We have worked with Marcia Polinsky, shoulder to shoulder. We have had Guadalupe Valdez. We have had Cecilia Colombi, Maria Carreira, Ana Roca, Marta Fairclough, Kim Potowski, Glenn Martinez, Maria Luisa Parra, and today Sara Beaudrie. All the heritage language big names have been right here, and we feel very proud about it. And if you miss them, don't worry, because you may still join them through the Observatorio YouTube channel, where you'll be able to access all the activities we have hosted during the last 4 years, including all the activities for training of teachers. So welcome to this Teaching Foreign Languages workshop about the Spanish as a heritage language, a workshop by Sara Beaudrie, who will be introduced by Maria Luisa Parra. We will be here until 1:30, more or less, 1:15, 1:30. At 11 or 11:15, more or less, depend on you, and it depends on Sara. We'll have a coffee break for having some coffee, beverages, and canapes, new canapes out there. And by the end of the workshop, we'll distribute an evaluation form and a certificate like this, in which you have just to write your names. The rest is the information about this seminar. Our guest today is Sara Beaudrie, and a brilliant expert about heritage languages, and as I said, Maria Luisa Parra will introduce her. I hope you enjoy very much this workshop, and thank you for coming to the Observatorio of the Cervantes Institute at Harvard. Welcome.
Okay, buenos días. Good morning, everybody. for those of you who don't know me, I'm Maria Luisa Parra, Senior Preceptor of Spanish at the Department of Romance Languages and Literatures. And I want to thank Professor Francisco Moreno Fernandez and the Observatorio for the support that they have given me to organize the seminar and the public talks with experts on the field of Spanish as a heritage language, that we know that it's expanding by the semester. And today we have the pleasure and honor to have Professor Sara Beaudrie, who has written extensively around this topic, and she's going to give us a very interesting presentation. Dr. Beaudrie is a professor of Spanish linguistics and the director of graduate students at Arizona State University at the Department or at the School of International Literatures and Cultures, SELC. She received her PhD in second language and teaching with a minor in Spanish linguistics from the University of Arizona. She earned her master's in teaching her research interests include heritage language development and classroom instruction, language program development, bilingualism, and heritage language assessment and literacy development. She has published numerous articles in peer-reviewed journals and presented in national conferences on heritage language pedagogy and development. She is co-editor of Spanish as a heritage language in the United States, The State of the Field, published by Georgetown University Press, and the co-author of Heritage Language Pedagogy, Research and Practice, published with McGraw-Hill. And just last year, she also co-edited another book with Professor Marta Firthcliffe, Innovative Strategies for Heritage Language Teaching, Guidelines for the Classroom. All of these three books are now considering, part of the bibliography that we all have to read to be updated in the field. Dr. Beaudrie was born and raised in Buenos Aires, but she has been living in Arizona for many years, and she teaches graduate courses in second and heritage language pedagogy and bilingualism. So welcome, Sara. Thank you for being here. Her presentation, Curriculum Design for Heritage Learners, Strengthening Research and Practice Connections, is going to be not only of interest to us, but also helpful in helping us rethink the way we are organizing our classes as we receive more heritage learners in our classes. So thank you, Sara.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you to both of you for inviting me here. It's a great honor to be here with all of you and share some ideas about what I'm very passionate about, which is curriculum design for heritage language learners. But we're going to be here sharing the next 3.5 hours, so I would like for us to take a few minutes and introduce each other to the people in your groups. And I'm also interested in hearing what your relationship is with heritage learners, your connection to heritage language learners. So take a few minutes to introduce yourselves in your tables. Hi. So how many of you are teaching heritage learners in high school? Okay, quite a few. How many of you are teaching heritage learners in university? Okay. How many of you have mixed classes? Most of you. How many of you are the lucky ones to have only heritage classes?
Only heritage students.
Yes, only heritage students. In the past. Okay. So thank you for sharing that. And what we're going to do today is basically talk about some of the research findings and their connection to the curriculum. But I'm going to be introducing some ideas, and then you are going to be working in groups to see how we can implement those ideas in our own classes. So it's not going to be a talk for an hour and then the workshop. Is going to be interactive throughout this time that we have, which is 3 hours. So let me say a few things about why I think it's important to explore research and practice connections. First of all, I'm an applied linguist, and applied linguists are interested in real-world problems and real questions that come from our context. And in my case, I'm particularly interested in the classroom and in heritage language programs. And what I find in my research is things like this one I'm going to show you now. So SHL researchers have argued for a long time that the home variety of heritage learners is central, right? And what I mean by that is just the way they speak, the dialect they speak. So why is that? Number one, it's crucial for their personal, family, and community communicative functions. They need to talk to each other, and they need to use the language that will be understood by that community. Second, students will develop their self-confidence when we are valuing their variety, and when we tell them that it is okay to use their own forms that they grew up with. And also, there are so many opportunities for them to use that variety right here in the United States. So if they get a job, for example, in healthcare or banking or education or social services, if they use another variety, let's say a more standard variety, they may not be understood, right, by the people they interact with. So that is why researchers have been saying that that variety is the one that needs to be welcomed in the classroom, and they also need to further develop it because they may not be completely fluent in that particular variety. Okay, so this comes from research, right? So now let's see what I found in the classroom. This is a syllabus from a class in the United States. And this is what it says. This is the course objective: improve learners' ability to read, listen, write, and read in Spanish. Identify the English forms that intrude in the Spanish that is spoken in the United States and find ways to avoid them. Okay, so is there a disconnect here between the two? Is this teacher valuing and respecting the variety of the student? No, I think this teacher is just trying to replace and repeal, right? Eradicate the student's variety from his or her discourse. So these are the things I worry about. You know, there's research telling us one thing, and then there's the truth, what's happening in the classroom. And so what I try to do is see how we can make those connections stronger, because that's the way I think we're going to be more successful for our students and also in our own teaching. Okay, so in order to make these connections stronger, I would like to start by the very basic question, which is also the most complex. Who is a heritage learner? Because I think we all have preconceived notions of who these learners are. And we may think that these students are, let's say in the case of Spanish, Hispanic students. But is that so? Are heritage learners only Hispanic students? Well, let's look at the definition that is the most common one. Have you seen the one by Guadalupe Valdez? Most of you? So if you remember, she says that a heritage learner is an individual who is raised in a home where a non-English language is spoken, and the student may speak or merely understand the heritage language and be to some degree bilingual in English and the heritage language. So she emphasizes the context. The context is the home, and the fact that they are bilingual, perhaps receptive bilinguals, or fluent bilinguals. There's a wide range of bilingual abilities. But let's contrast this definition with this one. The heritage learner is someone who has had exposure to a non-English language outside the formal education system. So what does this definition emphasize? No family. Simply
Language contact.
the contact with the language. So let's take a few minutes now and think about that question. Who this definition includes or excludes, and can you come up with your own definition for your own particular context? For example, in ASU, we have a huge community of returning missionaries that have spent 2 years in a community where a heritage language is spoken. So when they come back, we include them in our heritage program. They have not grown up speaking the language, and they do not have a family that speaks the language. But they, to us, they are heritage learners. So 5 minutes.
Y hay los hablantes que
Okay, so some ideas. Does any group have a good definition that captures your contextual needs? That group had a good idea.
We think that maybe there are students that learn Spanish outside school, or from family, or the nanny, or the friends, or any situation, but they start speaking Spanish for any reason outside school.
What I focus a lot on is the needs. So I ask them, what do you need? What would you like to accomplish in this class? And if the needs are similar, then I know that they belong in a heritage class. So if somebody tells me, I know how to read and write, I'm very good at it, but I can't speak and I'm not good at listening, then I know that that's not going to be the best student for a heritage language class. But if the opposite is true, then I know that the heritage class will be good for them. Yes?
So are you hinting that for you heritage speakers is more oral competency than written and read?
That is typically what we think about and what research shows about the needs and the strengths and weaknesses of heritage learners. They typically are stronger in their oral and listening skills, unless they are receptive bilinguals, right? Do you know who receptive bilinguals are? Receptive bilinguals are the ones that have heard listening to Spanish, but they have typically always replied in English. And so, your daughter? And so they know a lot, but they can't produce as much. And so your program may have a class for them, but those classes are less typical in the United States. Receptive bilinguals, yes. Okay, so when I write the course descriptions for heritage students, I try to define what I expect from them, the level I expect from them. Because they may be thinking that heritage learners are students who speak the language fluently, right? And they may not want to enroll in this class. They are afraid of the heritage class. So notice that I wrote there, this course is for learners who have low intermediate level proficiency. I'm not sure if they will understand that, but they will sure understand that it says low, right? And then they can understand and hold the basic conversation in the language. So to me that's very important, because I sometimes have a hard time convincing students that they have the right level to be in a heritage course. This is one of the first one actually, the first course for heritage learners. So that's something I started doing, just explaining the level that the class is for. Okay, now we are ready to move on. And we're going to be talking about 6 research insights. Some of them are very simple, but they are complex when it comes to the classroom and what to do about them. And I'm hoping that we finish the 6, but we may only do 4 or 5, depending on how it goes. So let's start with the first one, which is that the heritage language student population is very diverse. That's one of the first things that we learned from research. And the heritage student population, I think, looks a lot like this. Yes, do you agree? So what do we do about this? So these are some of the things we know now. Number one, students vary because they have received varying amounts of input growing up. So we cannot think that 2 students have been exposed to the same amount of input because of their personal histories and the number of contacts that they have had with the language. So we know that it has been different for each of them. Second, the amount of language use are different, right? Some of them have perhaps grown up speaking the language, in contact with the language, but then that contact stopped at the age of 5 or at the age of 6 when they started school. So some of them are still using the language, but some of them are not. So that makes a huge difference in the level of proficiency that they currently have. Educational experiences. Some of them have spent some time in the heritage language home country, right? Some of them maybe moved here after they finished 1st grade, 2nd grade, etc. And some of them have been schooled entirely in English. That makes a huge difference in terms of literacy, right? How about home language literacy practices in the home? Those also may be different for each of them. Of course, this also influences their exposure to different dialects and registers. If they have only been exposed to Spanish in the home, we can expect that the registers that they have been exposed to are informal, right? Casual. But if they have been exposed to the language in the school setting, they have had exposure to academic registers, right? And then there are differences in their personal histories, and that influences their attitudes. They may have positive attitudes, but not all of them, not all of them. And the proficiency level has an impact on this. So typically what research shows is that students at the higher level of proficiency have more positive attitudes, at least to their heritage language and to the way that they speak. And students at the lower levels of proficiency may have a negative attitude towards their variety and towards the way they speak, because they think that for example, in Spanish, their Spanish is pocho, right? It's not correct, it's not the true, pure Spanish. Okay, so in the book that I wrote with Potosky and Ducar, we try to represent all this diversity in terms of dimensions, to give you an idea of how wide this variation is. And these are all the dimensions and the areas that we included. And we touched upon a few of them. But for example, we talked about the differences in terms of generation, immigrant generation. Is it the same if a student comes from 1st generation or 3rd generation? Right? 1st generation are the ones that immigrated here themselves, and 3rd generation is their grandparents immigrated to this country. Think about all the differences that represent in terms of what they come to the classroom with. Then for example, in the linguistic dimension, we talk about the differences in age and order of acquisition. And why is that important? Because the later the student acquires the majority language, English, the stronger their heritage language will be. So if they spoke only the heritage language until the age of 5 or 6, they will be stronger heritage language users than if they learn the two languages simultaneously. Yes, just because of the amount of input, because of the amount of use. Okay, so that's also important to know. And then let's see, also in terms of identity, so how much they connect with their language and culture may be different for all of them. And we just had an example here. Would you like to talk about your student?
Sure. I had a student was trying to find a class for him, and I suggested to take the Spanish for heritage speakers because he speaks very well Spanish because her family was from Puerto Rico. So I wanted to say, well, I recommend this class, and he said, no, I'm not considering myself a heritage speaker. I want to take the grammar class because I want to improve my grammar. So I don't consider myself. So I talked with the coordinator because I didn't want to push him in that class because he felt very uncomfortable about that, my suggestion. And he went to Maria, he said, you leave it where he wants to go. He feels like that, so it's better. And he was in the advanced grammar, and that's what he wanted. He wanted to know learn the structures, to write, but he didn't consider himself a heritage speaker.
Mm-hmm. And that's very interesting, right? And important for our classrooms. Okay, so of course, all this diversity is going to have a huge impact in all of these areas that we have in terms of needs for the students, right? So, for example, vocabulary. What type of vocabulary are students going to be comfortable using? Can we say that for sure? Can we say that all of them are going to be comfortable using vocabulary that they use daily in their homes? Or there's going to be diversity, and some students can use some of the vocabulary used to express, for example, abstract concepts or academic concepts. I think we can talk about typical trends, but in reality we can expect a huge range, right? The same for reading and writing. We would expect students to struggle with reading and writing because of their experiences with the language. But that's not always the case. They may be stronger than what we think. So the important message here, I think, for us to remember that students have strengths and weaknesses. We need to, first of all, become cognizant of all their strengths, because that's what we need to start with in our classrooms, right? Their strengths. And we can expect variation. We cannot make assumptions about what they will need in the classroom. So what I would like for us to do now is examine these 4 questions about how we account for this diversity in the classroom. First of all, how can we identify and measure student diversity? How do we know? If we know that they are so diverse, what do we do? And what tools can we use to measure that diversity? I think that we covered number 2, which has to do with the definition. So you can briefly discuss that one if you need to say a few more things about it. And then number 3, curricular options that will help us deal with this diversity. And perhaps some of the obstacles that we encounter daily when we have such a diverse population of students. So share some ideas, and then I will share some ideas as well at the end. So 5 minutes?
5 minutes.
The first point I'd like to make is this issue of inclusive versus exclusive programmatic practices, right? So in one of the group discussions, they talked about, well, who do we exclude? And what I prefer to do is to be very inclusive. Include as many heritage learners as possible. Because then if the student doesn't feel comfortable in our classes, it's very easy to say, okay, go to the L2 program, because there are many options for them probably in the L2 classes, but not so much for the heritage program. So I prefer them to be included in the heritage program, and then if it doesn't work out, I tell them, well, perhaps you should switch. But it rarely happens, because once they get into a heritage class, they love it and they want to continue. The other issue is the single level versus multiple level programmatic structures. What do we do if we only have one class? Do we accept everybody in that class? Can we? Can we teach? What are your thoughts about it? Did you discuss this issue?
Mm-hmm.
What? Yes, there.
I was telling them that South we have two levels of classes for heritage speakers, the intermediate and the composition and conversation class. We try to assess as best as we can with grammar tests and oral written where to place these students. And I really, by experience, I do not see how I could mix the needs of the intermediate level with the needs of the composition and conversation students that will get bored when I'm in text with the others.
Yes, and then the lower level students, don't they get intimidated as well if everybody's very fluent in the class? So that becomes problematic when we include everybody in just one course. In Arizona, I directed 2 programs. The first one had 5 levels, and the second one had 4. The one I'm directing right now has 4 levels. So we start at the low intermediate, that's the class I showed you. And then we move on to, so 2 at the intermediate level and 2 at the advanced level. Ideally, every program would have these 4 levels, at least, right? In an ideal world.
I have heard, I do not know, but that in some of the California systems, the levels are not necessarily 1, 2, 3, but it's like for listeners and for other skills you enter into the class. Are you familiar with that kind of distribution?
No, I'm not familiar with that system, just in terms of listening skills or any skill. No. Any other comments or questions? Yes.
I am agree with this, but sometimes it's not our decision how to make the levels. I'm working in Miami, and at Miami-Dade we have the kids club, the kids classes, kids, 6 years to 15. If they heritage, no heritage, beginning, advanced, kids. And it's hard, but that's our reality.
So you have to be very resourceful, right, to be able to teach that class. Okay, so tools to identify and measure student diversity. What have you used and what has worked for you? I have here examples of things that we can talk about. For example, the culture and family background surveys to figure out more about their cultural background. And are you familiar with the National Heritage Language Resource Center? No? Okay, so you can write the name. And they have several surveys there. Some of them are used for research, but you can adapt them for your teaching context. I also like to include childhood and current language use. So not only their cultural background and family background, but also how much of the language, the context in which they are using the language at the moment. Because then I know what types of activities they will be able to do using those contexts. So I like to include that. And I like to include a language use log, because students may not realize how little they use the language, right? And so I ask them to keep a daily log for a day or 2, and they have to document how much they use the language, the heritage language and English, and in what context. And that gives them a better idea. And I do it at the beginning of the semester, the middle, at the end, so that we hopefully see progress. Because when we are going to talk about language maintenance, we emphasize that they need to increase the use of the heritage language. And so we use that as a way for them to reflect on how much they are using it. Several of you talked about personal interviews with the students to measure, you know, what they can do with the language. But is that enough? No, because we don't know if they can write. If so, also the essay, the typical essay, which ones have you used? What topics have you used? Like I have used, for example, talk about the day you graduated from college, or your last vacation. What else have you used?
I used a survey that I have about their background and experiences with the language. I asked that they reply in Spanish in the form of a paragraph. There are questions, but I don't ask that they answer each question will do it.
Oh, that's a very good idea. Yeah, so they read the questions, but they don't answer them in question form. They just write an essay. Okay. What else? What else have you used?
I asked them to write a paper about what they did during the summer, at least 300 words, 300 to 500 words, and they use sort of, I collect several samples of writing.
Okay.
I
But
look at the quizzes.
right there you are making an assumption, right? You are assuming that they can write 300 words.
No, these are, most of them
Fluent.
Yeah, proficient. Somehow, they have some level of proficiency in writing. So,
Okay, but for the ones then that do not have that proficiency, what you can do is give them options. So one basic option would be talk about your family, talk about last weekend, and then you move on, and you can say, what do you think about the use of weapons in the university setting? You can become quite complex in your prompts, but you want to give them options, right, that they are going to be comfortable with. Otherwise, they are going to be scared if they cannot write 300 words, right? Yes?
In my classroom, I do something similar, but I amplify it by allowing, give me as much Spanish as you can, or Spanglish, to kind of measure where they are in their output. And then when they give me the papers back, then I can see, who's where.
Yes, that's it. That's very good. If you think that you have students that will not be able to write a paragraph only in Spanish, they will need to use Spanglish, Spanish and English, etc. So some people like to use autobiographies to get to know the students, and that as the first project, they use that. And there's an article about that. Valence Rendon wrote it in 2005. So you can consult that if you're interested in implementing that in your classrooms. Diagnostic testing. I know that several of you administer a diagnostic testing at the beginning of the semester, right? However, do you use it throughout the semester? Do you use it before the unit starts, before you are going to teach a certain topic or a certain grammatical structure? Are you used to using that right before? No? Yes?
I am this semester because my students for their first assignment have to write a memorable story in the past. So what I'm doing is I am circling everything about the past that they haven't been able to produce well, and I'm going to give it back to them right before we start the past, so then they can look at what they understand, what they don't, and then I'm going to allow them to rewrite it after the lesson, hopefully that then I can help them better understand.
Yes, and see progress. Oh,
Yes.
that's a very good idea. So I encourage you to consider using diagnostic testing before you start the unit, because that allows you to understand what they know, to not insist on things that they already know. For example, if we think about heritage learners, most of them would be able to use the preterite form of the verb, right, for regular, verbs? Would you expect them to know that? No? Depending on the level, if they do know something about the preterite, they would be able to know the most common regular forms. How about the irregular?
They have some issues with regular.
They would struggle more with irregular forms. So this is what I'm talking about. You need to determine more or less where they are at before you start. And so you can do elicitation. If you don't want to do it orally, you can do an elicitation activity where you get them to use what you want them to use. You can do something in writing, like she did, like a pre-activity and then a post-activity. But I think that that's essential so that you target exactly what they need and not things that they already know. And another thing you can use is self-assessment. So you can use can-do statements. Are you familiar with can-do statements? And then if you use formative assessment, if you are constantly measuring what the student is doing and how much they are progressing, then you're gonna able to identify where those weaknesses are. And then you can support them through that. Let's see if I have anything else. Warning, appearances are deceptive, right? We already talked about that, and we cannot make assumptions because we may think that they are ready for something and they are not. And we want them to be successful. That's the most important thing in our classrooms because otherwise they will quit or, get discouraged.
I think that there's also a very interesting point when you ask these can-do statements.
Mm-hmm.
They might think they know how to do something or how to use the predative, but that idea of knowing might differ from what we think is to know a structure, right? Because they grew up in communities, equal communities, for example, where maybe the predative and imperfect are now being faded, those differences, but they don't know that that is happening in their community. So they come to us, say, I can do this, but then when we see some kind of essay, we know that not necessarily that's the case. So I think that for teachers, we also have to be aware of the fact that the way the communities that they are growing up in, the use of the structures that we think about in some way might be different. And then they think that they know it, and they actually know it from their communities, but not necessarily from our communities. And it's a fact, and it's something that we have to take into account also when we talk to them. Not say, oh, you don't know it. No, you know it as it is in your communities, and there's other possibilities, right?
Yes, I think that's a very good point, and I think we have to be very respectful of the fact that they may speak differently from the way we speak. We either learn it as a foreign language learner and we read the uses of the preterite and the imperfect from the book, or we learn it in our own communities and our communities' ways of using the preterite and the imperfect. But their ways may be different, and there's very little we can do to change that. With one class, with two classes, how are we going to change the way they grew up using the preterite and the imperfect? It's the same thing as, how, for example, I grew up saying si yo tendría, right? Instead of si yo tuviera. And somebody pointed out to me that when I was 18, and they said, you need to correct that. That's not the way you say it. And I've been trying since then to change it. And I can sometimes do it when I'm really careful, but most times I cannot do it. So this is what I think about when I think about heritage learners who grew up speaking a certain way. How are we in one class going to fix all of that, right? And is it necessary to fix all of that?
But I don't think that we have to fix it. I think that they have to be aware of when to use it. So when do they have to use it, like what they have learned? And so maybe with their family, like tendría, it happens the same with me, because in Navarra, in Spain, we say, si tendría dinero, me compraría una casa. Right? and I have been corrected all the time, and I'm like, no, this is my
I don't want to.
this is my dialect. Okay,
Yes,
so
yes.
maybe if I am writing and formally say for the university, or if I am in a conference, I wouldn't say si tendría. But if I am talking with you and you are my friend, okay, you are from Madrid, but you have to respect my dialect. So I think that we have to teach them like, okay, now if you are writing and you say here, or if you are talking to a professor, maybe you need to use si tuviera, but if you are with your family, you are perfectly talking okay. This is my opinion.
And it's a very good opinion to have, and that's what we want our students to develop, that empowerment, to know that the way they speak is valid,
And to
is
decide
my
when
way
to
of
use
speaking, and so it's of course valid, but many of them do not have that attitude, right? What attitude do they typically have? How do you say it? Is it right? Is it right or is it wrong? And they lack confidence. So that's one of our challenges, and that's a goal that we have in our classrooms, to build their confidence, to sound just like you.
It took me some time to talk.
Okay, so it took you some time.
Yes.
So some of the obstacles that I think we have to make this happen is, number one, the textbook. How many of you use textbooks? Very few of you. I still use textbooks, but when you have a lot of diversity, the text in the textbook is the same for everyone, and it sometimes doesn't work. So if you are in a context where there's a lot of diversity, you may have to ditch the textbook, right? Pre-made syllabi that is very rigid, I think is one of our main obstacles, especially if you want to do a grammatical syllabus, right, where you're gonna see structures one after the other. I think that's not gonna help you with this population. And then traditional exams, just because of what she was saying, if we give them a text to fill in the blanks with the preterite and the imperfect, they may know it, but they may not be able to fill in the blanks with exactly the form of the verb that we want them to use. So are you using traditional exams? Yes.
This is a problem we have, and again, I haven't taught the heritage speakers for a long time, but at the University of Massachusetts, we use a standardized placement exam.
Okay.
And then Anglo speakers who take the exam perform higher oftentimes than heritage speakers. And then the heritage speaker comes to my office. She was placed into third semester and she can have a full conversation. The one who placed into advanced grammar cannot read a McDonald's commercial in Spanish. So the placement exams are a problem too.
Yes. Very good point and very good example. So exams in this context are problematic. So we need to be careful. I prefer exams where students have to produce Spanish as opposed to fill in the blanks, multiple choice, etc., because those will be difficult for them to perform well. Yes?
I would just add to obstacles, and I'm thinking about this,
Yes.
what the man from UMass just said. The institutions themselves and your colleagues sometimes are resistant to using a traditional exam. And so I think that's a huge obstacle. I would add to that list.
Yes, teachers, I mean, administrators,
Yes.
right, are a huge obstacle. Yes. Well, thank you so much for that comment, because I think it is very relevant to our next topic, which has to do with a learner-centered curriculum for heritage learners. So this is what researchers have said. A learner-centered approach is more effective for curricular and lesson development in the heritage context. And I know that we are all familiar with this topic, right? Teacher-fronted classes are not popular these days, and teachers are expected to be facilitators, and students are responsible for their own learning, etc., etc. But I think that in the heritage context, this acquires a new meaning. because we cannot start anywhere else than with the students. So I like this quote, which says the starting and central point in planning the heritage curriculum is the learner, right? So let me show you what I think about when I think about starting by the learner. First of all, I think it's important to consider the students' interests. What do they want? Many of them do not need to be in a heritage class or a Spanish class, right? Because many of them could take a test. When they, for example, at the university level, they take the CLEP test and they just CLEP out. They don't need to be in our classes. So my goal is to make the class as interesting as possible for them. So some of the things that students have said that they like in research, and there's an article in 2009 about culture and what students want in terms of that. And there's one in 2015 where I compare the perspectives from teachers and students in terms of what they expect. So these are some of the findings. The students do not like to use a book, which I think you can imagine why. They expect to have interaction, to interact with them, with each other in the classroom. And even though they need to work on reading and writing, they prefer to do all that at home as homework and use class time to use the language with each other. They value feedback from instructors, even though many heritage teachers prefer not to use feedback, at least in oral discourse, right? Typically we don't correct them, we don't give them feedback, but if we do that, we need to explain it to them because they still value it, probably because of their lack of confidence, right? They think that they need to be corrected. And there's a strong preference for cultural content. We gave them a lot of options. Do you want to talk about history and literature and art and traditions and values? They marked all of them. They are interested in learning more about all of them, and especially connecting to the local communities. They want interactions with speakers of the language in the community. And what I did is bring a quote from a student that kind of helps us realize how important it is to them to learn about culture. Who would like to read it? Anybody?
I think it makes it that much more interesting because we're not just learning about pronunciation or grammar or sentence structure or how to write an essay. We're learning about us and like how our ancestors, well maybe not our ancestors, but how the different Hispanic peoples live in the United States and other Latin American countries. And it's just so exciting. Like I know almost every day I have class, I go home and I tell my mom, Mom, I learned this, or oh my God, Mom, I didn't know this. And it's so nice because now we have something to talk about and I don't know, it's really cool.
Okay, well, you can see how excited she is, right? And how important it is to learn about these cultural topics. So, let's move on with another important consideration, and that is the type of experiences that students have had with the language. These experiences have been in natural contexts, right? So, will they be good language learners? Can we go tell them, go study for the test? They are not good language learners because Spanish or the heritage language for them is just the way they live, the way they speak daily. They are used to natural communication. And so what we try to do in the classroom is imitate that. Make the classroom as much as possible the same as what happens in their family interactions, their community interactions, and less of a language class as we think about it. And they value that. of course, we need to respect what they know, what they bring to the classroom, and we talked about that, so we are not going to say anything else about it. Although one thing that I'm interested in is learning journals. So allowing them to reflect about the learning process as a tool for us to know how they are learning. Because sometimes it's difficult, right? I mentioned just now that they are not good language learners. So maybe starting to use journals where they can reflect about learning could be a way to understand them better. And I'm curious to see if you have used them.
I've used journals in the past where they register the things that they feel they're learning. They write down usual mistakes that they get corrected over compositions. They work on that throughout the semester. And before I just used journals, but this semester I will tell you how it works. I don't know if it will work. I added to the journals entrevistas personales, where they will come with a journal to work with me, and we will try to determine what the goals will be for each of them in my office in about half an hour, a couple of times in the semester. And so when they will have to probably do some work that reflects part of what we talked about, or they will have to pay more attention to a few items that we decide to work on. I don't want to make a long list for everyone and they will feel overwhelmed. But I'm hoping that in the interviews I will come up with 3 or 4 things very specific that we could work on more and pay more attention to the following assignments. So I don't know if it will work, but I'm hoping to complement that journal so it doesn't stay in just a paper that they will put away or keep to themselves, and then we can share it and work on it.
Yes, so this is a very good practice in differentiating instruction. If you're familiar with that term, Maria Carreira has an article in 2007 where she illustrates the use of learning journals, contracts, and other activities that you can use in the classroom. So I recommend that you look at that article about that.
What's the Carreira?
After this point, we can make a pause.
Yes. Are you ready for a break?
Oh, sure.
Yes.
Yeah, we can stop here and continue after the break. I think if you want to go and get something to eat or drink, it will be fine, but we would like to continue because we are running out of time. And so we are going to move on to point number 3, which is about the goals of heritage language instruction, which differ from the goals of L2 instruction. Are you all familiar with this? The 5 C's, right? The standards. However, these standards can be used for the heritage classroom because we're still focusing on the same things like communication and cultures. But the point here is that they are not enough. We need to consider other goals in addition to these 5 C's. And these are the goals that Guadalupe Valdez and Aparicio have proposed for heritage language instruction. Are you familiar with them?
No.
No? Okay, so the first goal is heritage language maintenance. We want to reverse the trend that after the 3rd generation, heritage learners lose, or heritage speakers actually, lose their language and they become first English dominant and then they lose the heritage language completely. So this happens more or less in 3 generations, right? 3 or 4. We believe that through heritage language classes, we can reverse this trend and students can achieve heritage language maintenance beyond that, not only by using the language themselves, but also by transmitting the language to their children. Then we want to expand their bilingual range. We want them to be more flexible in the way they use both languages. And of course, become more fluent in using the language in more formal and academic contexts. And for that, we talk about the need for them to develop a prestige variety of language, the so-called standard, right? Literacy is very important in the heritage classroom, right? We need to strengthen their literacy skills. Their academic skills are also important because many of them come from underprivileged families, and they may not have the skills necessary to succeed in a classroom, in college. So we want to reinforce that through our classes. And then, of course, work on developing positive attitudes and further develop their cultural awareness. So these are our 7 goals. And now what I would like for us to do is think about the curriculum and what do we do to incorporate these goals in our classes. And so I'm going to give you an example with the first one, and then you will be picking one of the goals and working in groups to develop those objectives and then activities that you can do in the classroom. So this is the first one, heritage language maintenance. What do I do in my classroom? Well, first of all, I thought about objectives that I would like to accomplish. And so the first objective is to understand contextual and ideological issues related to heritage language maintenance in the United States. So we actually talk about ideologies that play a role in the maintenance of a minority language in the United States, right? Because Spanish is not a majority language, and so it's not as valued, as respected as English is. We want students to understand the causes of language shift and loss, because if they become aware of this, they can begin to prevent it in themselves and in their family. They need to become cognizant of the benefits of bilingualism, right? Appreciate language diversity, and not only language diversity, but also differences in language proficiencies. Because what happens when a student, for example, has difficulty using the heritage language? What does a student, a heritage learner, do when another person can use the language very well? They quickly switch to English, right? And so that's a problem, because how is the person who is struggling to use the heritage language going to develop that language if the native speakers and the heritage speakers in the community switch to English? It's not going to help them. So that's what we try to do. We try them to become sensitive to differences in proficiency level. So of course they need to strengthen their language skills, increase the amount of time they use the language, and transmit the language to their children. Importantly, educate members of the community about the importance of language maintenance. So we may not be able to reach every member of the community, but through our students, we can have a larger impact if they themselves become agents of change and agents of language maintenance. So we want to empower them so that they adopt that active role in their own communities. Okay, now let's move on to sample activities to make all this happen. We use some of these activities in our classes. For example, blogs and journals, where students can talk about all of these issues among each other. Or if it's a journal, they would reflect about their own attitudes, their own beliefs about the language, and like I said, about their language use. We do a lot of debates and group discussions. So we give them material to read or videos to read. For example, there's a video that I like, which is No Child Left Monolingual. Have you heard of it?
No.
So this is a video by Kim Potowski. And video, you will see it and you will understand how you can use it, and you can use similar ones for other topics. We try to foster community engagement in any way we can through what we call cultural projects or community projects, so that students go out into the community and they can do different things. For example, record language use in the community, record the presence of the language in the community with their phones, for example. So become cognizant of all the resources that they have in the language. Yeah, activities like that one. And then we also do as tasks projects that students get to put all that they learned in a, for example, brochure. A brochure about language maintenance. So that's one of the projects where the students, actually we have a Heritage Language Awareness Week at my university. And so after students do this project about the benefits of maintenance and bilingualism, they have a table and they get to talk about their peers about the importance of bilingualism. So you get an idea more or less of what we do, how we promote language maintenance in our classes. So what I would like you to do next then is go back to the goals number 2 through 7 and see in what ways you can incorporate them in your curriculum. ¿Listos? ¿Listas? ¿Por acá listos? ¿Listos? ¿Listos? ¿Está bien? ¡Asesínense! Ok. Les hablan así. Okay, are we ready? Okay, so I think we need the list back, right? This is the list. So I'd like to ask you now about just a summary. If you can present just a summary, about 2 minutes, with some of the ideas that you discussed to promote each of these goals. So, number 2. Yes. Acquisition of a prestige language variety.
Yeah, we made a lot of emphasis in the prestige and the variety. And the way how we approach it is that we're not gonna go for a standard rigor. This is the right way. You're not supposed to say it was right in that way, because this is what the way how you're supposed to do in the classroom. You can speak that way, but at home on the street. But here in the classroom, it's supposed to be that way. So I think that approach limits the capacity of the students and doesn't enrich the class. So on the opposite side, every experience, everything that the student brings to the class, we can use it to enrich, to multiply the variety of the language and the acquisition that the students are getting in class. That's the way how it's said. Right.
So we are going to enrich their linguistic repertoires.
Exactly.
Right? We are not going to add and subtract, rather enrich, and so that they can become more flexible in the way they use the language and in the context, the number of contexts that they are able to use the language. Very good. Anything else? So I think that the attitude towards this is the most important. Don't you think, in terms of this goal, our attitude is very important, and we need to understand that sometimes we need to explain this to the students, because they themselves have heard these beliefs about language and about correction, and they will believe all that. And so we need to teach them. We need to tell them. We need to let them know that the way they speak is okay, right? That's the main challenge, I think, because it's hard to convince them. They grew up with these beliefs. right? Okay, yes?
But there's the other ones that you said that it's okay the way that they speak.
Mm-hmm.
But I have in my classroom some of the students that at home they speak English and then they come to my class and they are forced to speak Spanish. And they don't like it. So they're there and a lot of the students want to change from this class to the other because this one is kind of too much work. It's
Okay,
kind of
so that's why
difficult.
we have goal number 6,
Okay.
right? Which is about developing positive attitudes. Sometimes we need to do that as well. So number 1 and number 6, I think, are about what you're talking about. Okay, let's move on to number 3, expanding the bilingual range. Yes.
We were talking as a group about the context that the 2 languages get used, so English and Spanish, or English and the heritage language, and kind of playing with those ideas and the context. So maybe asking them to, for example, as a activity, as a group activity, going to a restaurant, all of us, and using the heritage language that they're not used to using in a context of going to a restaurant. Or maybe thinking about, we were also thinking about interpretation, so maybe having a group activity where it's in groups of 3s and there are 2 students who are speaking different languages, so one speaks the Spanish, let's say, and one speaks English, and the person in the middle is interpreting between, and trying to build that skill of interpretation on the spot, and being the mediator between the 2 different languages. And
Translation.
oh, translation, that's right. And then thinking about maybe watching a video or looking at a piece of writing and doing translation because they're not used to doing that in Spanish is used in maybe a specific context. So it's used in the home. Maybe having them do something like an activity where it's about art or culture or something where it's building that, expanding that vocabulary and the skill necessary to talk about harder topics.
Okay, great. Those are great activities. I think the most important thing about this is to not forget that our students are bilingual and they are constantly mediating between the 2 languages. So if we stick only to Spanish in our classrooms, and for example, we don't translate vocabulary items for them, they are not going to be able to walk between these 2 languages as easily. So we need to acknowledge their bilingualism, and we need to use that bilingualism as a resource in our classrooms. There's an article where students are allowed to do the outlines and the first draft for their writings in English and Spanish. So using code switching, and they showed that their writing was richer because they were able to use their bilingualism. So I think that's something we need to keep in mind, simply that they are bilingual and we can use that as a resource in our classrooms. Okay, then transfer of literacy skills.
To recognize, or to help students recognize that they aren't starting from 0, that they actually have skills already that they can transfer. Let's say if English is the primary language, from one class or from one language to the other. The use of a dictionary, but how to use a Spanish-English dictionary, for example, how to use a Spanish thesaurus, how to even use maybe translation tools or apps like Google into maybe, or Wikipedia. I'm thinking of things that students use on their phones as well as in the classroom to help them to recognize that they already have some cognizance of language structure, that we just need to open another door, another window into the language that they're experiencing maybe for the first time in a classroom setting. So I'm thinking of literacy boards. We have a literacy team in our school, so I'm building one in my floor that is literacy. The word of the week will be in Spanish and French and Latin and German as a bridge, into other languages for, like a school-wide thing. But in our classrooms, maybe something like a word like niño in El Salvador, cipote, in Colombia, peladito, and so maybe duplicating our own word wall to show the language variety within the Spanish-speaking cultures in the world. So that's what we talked about.
Yeah, that's great. Those are great ideas. How about for number 5? You want to add something? Yes.
I'm sorry, I just have a question about this transfer.
Yes.
Because it says literacy skills.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I wonder if they can actually transfer literacy skills, because the styles of writing in English and Spanish are different, right? And if we are thinking about genre approach, and yesterday one of my students was saying, we were talking about a short story of Monterroso, Eclipse, and they said to me, why are you talking about the story in the past? Are you supposed to do it in the present? So I was like, well, I've never thought about it, because I always talk about what Monterroso wrote did. And so, but they were pointing out those different, because we learn in our writing classes that you're supposed to report in present. So I would just always have some questions about that transfer.
I think that what is meant here actually is more like literacy strategies. That's what they can transfer. So, for example, guess the meaning of a word out of the context.
So see, that's
right? So those are what they are thinking, or what Guadalupe Valdez was thinking about when she talked about skills, not the same idea that you're talking about. Because there are things that you cannot transfer in terms of style.
That kind of that precise term,
word.
Because I think that it's read as, if I know how to use certain discourse connectors, are the same in Spanish, and not necessarily, or the structure of a text is the same and is not necessarily the same.
Yes. So you suggest changing to strategies.
Yes.
Okay. We'll see if we can make that change.
We can propose it together.
Yes. Thank you for that point. How about 5, development of academic skills? So here we are also talking about strategies. In number 5.
Oh,
that is easier. Yes.
Well, first of all, we want them to understand that we want them to succeed, not only in our class, but in their experience at the university. And explain to them that what we're sharing with them in terms of helping them develop their academic skills is going to help them not only in our course, but in other courses. And one of the things that we would start with is writing very clear objectives in the syllabus so they can clearly understand what they're supposed to do, but then also help them to understand how to read a syllabus. Because for any student who is transitioning from high school to college, they generally don't know how to do that. But it is even more important for the heritage speakers or heritage language students, because a lot of them tend to be first generation or come from less privileged backgrounds, so they don't have anyone at home to turn to for this. And we will help them develop a calendar so they can put all their different projects in the calendar. It can be electronic or it can be a manual calendar, depending on their learning style and depending on whether or not they have a phone. And then we also will help them to understand what are the resources available to them in terms of the university-wide. So if there is tutoring available, explain to them how it works, how they can take advantage of that, and also to say to them that the stigma that sometimes exists, that you shouldn't go and ask for help, actually is not going to help them succeed. The more they ask questions, the more successful they are going to be. If there is an AHANA center or a multicultural center, if they feel comfortable going there, those centers usually are very much in tune with their needs, and they have mentoring programs, and perhaps they can take advantage of that as well. And also we would help them see if there are any other things at the university available, like maybe computer workshops. Maybe they can go to a workshop that teaches them or helps them in understanding how to use the platform that the university uses. I've seen that a lot. We use a platform at my school and the students don't know how to use it. So if we start telling them that they need to upload the information for their homework in Canvas and they don't know how to use Canvas, I'm never going to get their homework. So whatever we can do to help them succeed, because there is a lot of research that shows that the more you are available to them, and also the more that they are able to succeed, the better their self-esteem will be in the long haul.
Okay. Well, I think you said it all. I would just like to add that what I also emphasize is the skills that they can learn, that they can use for other classrooms. For example, using PowerPoint and presenting, right? All these skills that perhaps we assume that they will know, but we can't.
Or one more thing we said, sorry that I forgot, is office hours, utilizing the professor's office hours, because they're afraid of going to
Won't we all love it if they would learn that before they come to college? Because they don't. They don't use the office hours, they don't come to tutoring. Okay, and 6? Who had, you had 6?
We did, yes. We talk about using poems, like bilingual poems or literature, where it's emphasized like Spanglish. We talk about how a language is power. So how we can use examples from other parts of the world where there are languages that were silenced, or like for example in Spain, or indigenous languages, and how they survive, and what that means, and what's happening in the United States, and how maybe get interviews from people who couldn't speak the language in the school, stories like that, to emphasize.
Or also interviews with people that are using the language for their jobs, for example, in their careers, so that they see how valuable it is for their long-term careers.
We also talk about having them log when do they use English, Spanglish, or when do they use the heritage language, in which situations. What else do you? Yes.
The idea of learning to analyze their own use and the use of other people, so that they can appreciate how it is valuable. That it has an emotion.
And of course, appreciating linguistic diversity is, up to a certain extent, easy, because of if we have students from different backgrounds, then we can incorporate that. Every time we want to talk about a word, for example, autobús, they were saying here, we can use the diversity in the classroom for them to learn to appreciate it. Yes.
We were working on 6 too.
Okay.
We were working on formulating the objective for this.
Okay.
We didn't get to talk more about activities, but I see 2 parts in this. On my hand, reflecting on the impact that Spanish speakers have. We were talking about first at a local level, then at their own state, national level. So activities that have to do with that, with information on that, would help. And on the other hand, a lot of rejection and negative attitudes have to do with ignorance. So ignorance.
Oh, yeah.
So I would like to see a little instruction or activities that have to do, like you were saying, with the dialectology. In the grade program, I would love to see a class of dialectology at the end, at the upper levels. But if we cannot do that, at least do activities that could work, just fun activities. For instance, changing one phrase into expressing it in different dialects, like me puse las medias, la pollera y la campera. I'm sure you can say that in sometimes activities, informal, like you say, informal reflection, constant reflection on different ways and acceptable ways to say one thing.
That's why in every class I have these cultural projects or community projects, so that I can do these things. So in addition to regular activities that we do, they have to do a project. And one of them has to do with linguistic diversity. And so we pick, as a group, let's say 10 items, and then they have to go around and see all the many ways that they are translated into the different dialects. At the University of Arizona, I was lucky because I taught a phonetics class for heritage learners. And about 2 months of the class was devoted to dialectology, and they loved it. They love to learn about the different dialects. So it can happen. We can have that kind of class.
The most fun in the classes, in my experience, is that when we start reflecting on dialects, when I have variety in class.
Yes. Okay, so last one, development of cultural awareness. Does any your group?
So we were talking about like about this cultural awareness to know that Hispanic culture is not only one, there are many, and part of it is here in the U.S. And it's different, like there is a Hispanic community, it's different in Massachusetts, from Texas, from Chicago, from California. And we need to know that it's not the same thing that they have in their countries of origin, but it's something that they are part of, and that is here in the U.S. That's important also for like say self-consciousness and self-motivation for that. So
Okay.
we were talking, we can work with projects with the community, by themselves, with the families. Like some of the groups were saying, like mixing the different cultures so they can learn more from different origins, for instance.
Mm-hmm. And maybe they can learn about how some of the customs or values from the home culture get adapted right here. For example, I don't know, Cinco de Mayo, you know how it's different in Mexico than here. What else? There are, right, many differences like that. You were
Cinco de Mayo, we don't celebrate.
No, we don't.
Yeah.
And also they think it's our Independence Day.
Uh-huh.
So I use it as a historical moment for them to know exactly what it was and why we don't really celebrate it other than in Puebla. We only won the battle for 3 days.
But actually, it's a very important celebration and mention to it because at the time, Texas was part of Mexico, and the general who led and won the battle against the French were from Texas, right? So it's also a very good reminder of how, Mexico, Texas was part of Mexico, and that deep interconnection that both countries have, and that they don't think about, especially now, right? That we're into the world discourse. But I think that kind of celebration and reminder really could give them a very interesting perspective, and why it's so powerful here and not so much.
Yes. Okay, so we are going to move on to research insight number 4. And I think this is going to be our last one for today, and I'm going to include some of the notions from the others. But I'm going to be showing some examples about methodological approaches. So the idea here is that L2 methodological approaches do not work in the heritage classroom, at least some of them. And here I have some that have been mentioned before. For example, micro-based approaches. Do you understand what that is? That is just presenting language in small bits and pieces. So typically in the foreign language classroom, we want students to learn a little phrase. And we expand from the little phrase to the sentence, and perhaps much later to the discourse level activities, right? So it would be like building a wall when you put one brick and then the other, etc., until you build the wall. That is a micro-based approach, dissecting and analyzing the different pieces of the language, which you can see why it will not work as well in the heritage classroom because of their prior exposure to the language. Focus on metalinguistic knowledge. So would they be able to understand all the complex words that we use to describe language, to describe grammatical concepts? How do you think that will work in the heritage classroom? They're going to be confused, right? And actually, I have a study that I did in 2006 where students were taking an L2 class. These were heritage learners in an L2 class. And one of their comments was that they were very, very confused when it came to grammar terminology and grammar explanations, etc. Focus on studying the language, right? Like go home and study. What does that mean in this context? And then grammar-based syllabi, right? Starting from the present, preterite, imperfect, etc. That may not work as a way to organize our classrooms in the heritage context. So we have 2 main approaches that have been proposed for the heritage classroom. And the first one is the opposite of the one I mentioned earlier, and is the top-down approach. Are you familiar with whole language education? Whole language education is a top-down approach. We introduce our students to the language as a whole, discourse level activities. From the very beginning, they are introduced to texts, authentic discourse. So you do not dissect the language into little pieces, okay? And the way to do that is, for example, by using a content-based approach or a project-based approach. And I'm going to show you each of them. And then, of course, I mentioned earlier the importance of differentiated instruction. Okay, so are you familiar with the Star Talk series, the workshops? Those workshops are totally free, and they are available through the National Heritage Language Resource Center. And in these workshops, which are simply videos, you can hear Olga Kagan and Maria Carreira talk about the top-down approach to heritage language education. And I like this quote from Romero that says, effective heritage language instruction is a marriage between focus on content and structure, with meaning and relevance leading the way and form following the dynamics of the course or the class. So I think this captures what we are trying to say here. We need to focus on meaning, content, authentic interaction, discourse level activities, and then form will come right behind when needed and as needed, right? Is the opposite of having a grammar focused approach, right? So here we are going to be focusing on content first and form later. Okay, so just to give you an example, this comes from Carrera 2006, when we expose students to writing in a top-down approach. We will be giving students longer texts from the beginning, initial emphasis on the content, gradually building toward improving stylistics, grammar, and spelling. The opposite would be sentence level, gradually increasing to paragraph, and then longer. Okay, so is this clear, the difference in the approach? Okay. So the first one that I mentioned is the content-based approach, and this is by far the most commonly used in heritage language education because of the use of text, right? And this is what our books use. And so the study of content, for example, cultural content, comes together with the study of language. And the positive aspect of this approach is that you can include topics that students are interested in, hopefully. So you can include history, culture, traditions, values, etc. What are the drawbacks of this approach? So the benefits, of course, we mentioned some of them. Well, can you think of any drawbacks of this approach?
It might be bewildering to students who aren't as proficient as others. Maybe they might feel not comfortable reading. They don't have the vocabulary, or maybe they just feel bewildered by the sheer mass of it.
Yes, so it works well for a class where more or less all the students are at the same level. But if you have a multi-level class, unless you can come up with different texts, it will be difficult to use the same text for the whole class. Anything else? Any other drawback of content-based approach? Okay. It is one of the preferred methods, and many people use it.
Couldn't you use the same text, but differentiate the activity you have people doing?
Yes, Yes, those are time consuming, right? Creating different activities for all the textbooks. It's time consuming, but you could, yes. You could. The one I like particularly is project-based learning. Why? Because it's engaging, because the students have to solve a problem. And first of all, it's very useful to implement a student-centered model of education. And it lends itself very well to differentiated instruction. Because when you think of a project, for example, they are going to talk about the family. You can make it very simple, where students have to write their family trees and describe the family tree, or you can make it very complex. They can talk about the histories of their family and the cultural background of their family, etc. So you see how you can adapt the same project to different levels and the different needs of the students. So we use, for example, this is an example of project-based learning. Students do 2 essays in an advanced Spanish class. In the first part, they have to research a problem in their community. So they have to talk to people and see something that interests them, but also is relevant to their own communities. And then they write about it in the first part, and in the second part, they have to do research to try to find solutions for that problem. And then we have a conference where the students get to present this to each other and to their families. So, project-based, any drawbacks to this approach? Do you like it for the Heritage Classroom? Yes?
They may not come from the same community.
You mean if it's an online class, you're saying?
For online? No, or even in the same class, they may come from different social and economical backgrounds, so they don't have the same problems.
Okay, no, but each student has to decide what they want to do for this project. It's not the same project for the whole class.
Okay.
Each student works individually. But you are right, because typically project-based, this methodology typically is for group work. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah.
Okay. We don't do that.
Yeah. My question would be, if we do not have like a grammatical based syllabus and it's only this project, like what is it that you're teaching and you're looking for to evaluate? Like, do you have course objectives and how do you?
Well, each project has to have a rubric, right?
Okay.
And you will expect certain grammatical uses for students to complete the project. But the way to address grammar in this type of model is on a need basis. So when the students are completely in the project, they may need a certain grammatical structure or practice with a certain grammatical structure, and so then you deal with it at that moment. So it's based on what the students need and what the project demands. It's not based on, okay, now we are going to learn about the preterite, or now we are going to learn about the imperfect. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Do you want to give your example about that?
Well, usually I keep evaluating the needs throughout the semester in different essays or conversations, and I keep noticing what are the things that need to be explained, addressed, and then I do it. But it's all coming from them at a specific time in class. I have an idea of what things they need, but I don't present them a priori. I want to hear what they really need, and then whatever explanation you give at the discourse level or sentence level, it's more effective than just. I think that they are going to need a subjunctive and prepare a class of subjunctive, but they don't use it yet, or they haven't used it yet. So I just wait for them.
Or for me, the feeling is that they have all along used it, but they do not necessarily define it, right? Do we have that with a lot of the heritage speakers?
They don't necessarily
define it. Oh, ese era el subjuntivo. Cuando yo quiero que
Exactly, they might not recognize it. So
they don't have the metalinguistic awareness to see what's being used and how.
But they understand.
yes.
And the question that I have with that is, do they need to? How many of native speakers here of English know how to use grammar and everything about grammar?
Es que the problem here is that if you want them to be licensed to be teachers of Spanish in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, you need to know it.
If they're going to be language teachers.
Yes.
That, I agree with you there.
It's also more personal. I mean, if you learn that formal aspect of language, you are learning about diversity, you are learning about everything we were talking about, you are learning about different ways, different registers, different geographical differences, and that makes you learn and want to learn more. At least that's what happened to me when I learned English in a native way, in a more induced, like kind of informal way. When you start learning more formally, it's different. You have another point of view of language, of how it varies, of how it works, and it's, I don't know, I think it makes you want to learn more, want to know more.
Yes, so although many of us are linguists, we are interested in all of this. But let's think about our students.
Right. And I think it's also about priorities for a 14-week course.
Yes.
So what are the priorities? I always teach them if they want to know. This is, the technical term for this is el pluscuamperfecto del subjuntivo, name as awful as have regrets, because you use this tense to, convey regret. But I don't test them in, do you remember what's the technical name of this? I don't do that.
Yeah, the traditional test. Okay. And that's important, because if we are going to later test them, we do need to include all of this. But the question again is, what is the role of this grammar teaching, this grammar instruction in the heritage classroom? Because it may not be necessary, or it may be necessary for a certain class. Let's say if we have a class, a grammar class, right? A 400 level class or a 300 level class. I'm talking third year, fourth year at the university level. Maybe we do need then a grammar class for them, but not in a language class, right? Okay. The next one I talked about is place-based education. Are you familiar with place-based education? It's very similar to project-based education, but the difference is that it uses local, cultural, and historical situations as the context for learning. Okay? So basically you use all the resources that you have in your community to present to students and make that the object of learning. This, of course, cannot be done everywhere because it depends on the community where you are at. But it has the potential of having a real impact on local communities and making those connections between the students and the local community very much stronger. So I have talked to many students who come to the Spanish class and say, this is the only place where I use the language. This is the only place I have to use Spanish. And this is in Phoenix, where 40% of the population speaks Spanish. So how is that possible? And if we think about language maintenance, we need to change that. And this is the opportunity that we have through place-based education to make those connections stronger. So a group of students from the University of Arizona, McAvoy, Holmes, and Lemos, created a whole curriculum for the first class, the beginning level class, based on place-based education. And this is one of the projects that they did. Students had to go into the community and find a mural, investigate the symbols represented in the mural, and reflect on its meaning to them. And then they created a 6 to 8 minute video where they described the mural and discussed its significance. So you get the idea how, instead of using the text, instead of using an art exhibition from the book or from whatever you want to use, you are using your local community. Benefits and drawbacks? What do you think? And I think you used it a lot for your art projects in your classrooms by doing visits to the museum, right?
Right. It was a way of giving them a model that they could follow, but then they would apply it to their own personal insights through the class to create some art project. But this is a little bit different because it's whatever is out there in the community to talk about it, and I think it's really interesting.
Yes.
Well, I think that kind of activity is fantastic. But I think one drawback, I've seen this with projects like this with Harvard students sometimes, is that it takes longer to create a video and to edit it, and than it does maybe to just write something for some students. And if they don't have the technical skills to do it, it takes even longer. But the other thing is it can be really hard to, if someone has actually very good skills in that kind of area, it can be hard, and other students do something that's much rougher and kind of clumsier. If you don't have a good rubric, I think it can be hard to assess it. Does that make sense? You know what I'm saying? It's a potential drawback. It doesn't have to be a drawback, but I think...
Well, of course you would remove anything that has to do with technology from the rubric, right?
That's right.
So you don't need to evaluate that technological aspect.
No, but I think actually it's very hard if something is visually really stunning. You're taking in something as a viewer. So you're absorbing something about what they're trying to say or explain. That's hard to separate because you're attracted to it. Does that make sense? It's not insurmountable. I think it is. I think it's just something to be aware of.
Yes, a bias, maybe subjectivity when evaluating the project. Sometimes they want I used to have a portfolio that every student used to do, and there were some that were beautiful, and it's hard not to be biased towards those beautiful portfolios as opposed to the one that just put everything together, right, and gave you the folder.
Yeah, well, when I tell them that they have to create some kind of art at the end, everybody, becomes pale and it's like, and I say, well, I don't want you to worry, I'm not going to grade the quality of your art project. I'm going to grade the ideas behind it. So I don't expect anybody to be a Picasso or Diego Rivera, but I expect you to be able to kind of sustain, como darle apoyo to that project with ideas. So
But what's the difference between, because the medium itself, I think, is not unrelated. So if there's this would not happen in high school, I don't think, but with college students, if someone were a film major and understood visual rhetoric, they'd be able to create a more powerful, they'd be able to express their ideas more powerfully.
Okay, I have a few thoughts about that. The first one is thinking about the skills that we need to teach our students. I think it's important for them to develop the technological skills to just do a video. Nowadays, it's just a question of using your phone, right? So, number one, they need to help them develop those skills. And number two, I like the idea of giving them options. So, one of them can be a video, another one can do a PowerPoint presentation, another one perhaps a written reflection. You don't have to do the same thing for everyone. And this leads us to our next point, which is differentiated instruction. I always teach my students about transitions, my teachers, how to transition, and I feel that this is a good example of how to do it well. So, are you familiar with differentiated instruction and differentiated assessment? I think you all are. And we can differentiate the content that we give students, the activities, and this is my point, the type of activities that they will perform, or the assessment, what we evaluate from the students. I haven't seen this model used often because of the work involved. But I think it can be very powerful for the heritage classroom, especially if you have a multi-level course. Has anybody been successful using differentiated instruction, assessment? Have you tried it? First of all, in order to, I think, do it well, you will need to have self-evaluations or a diagnostic assessment before you start the activity, right? I think the most successful way of doing it is with those choices that I talked about. And the students themselves can choose what they are comfortable with and what they can do. It could be also negotiation. You can talk to them, interview them, and make sure that they're not choosing the easiest option just to get an easy A. But I think we need to leave it up to the students up to a certain extent to choose what they can do. Or if you have different activities, for example, for a reading assignment, some of them may choose to do some reading comprehension questions, or some of them may want to work on the vocabulary, some of them may want to translate it, right? So the more choices we give the students, the more we will be implemented differentiated instruction without doing it consciously, right? Any ideas you would like to share about differentiated instruction and how it worked in your classroom? For assessment, do you use differentiating assessment?
Yeah, I mean, as long as the student shows you proficient, it doesn't matter how he's going to show you. As you said, it could be a paper or a PowerPoint or a video or a song, you know, as
however,
for the proficient, not for the way how you show it.
But if students are at different levels, you are going to try to focus on progress as opposed to on the product. Because it would be very difficult to evaluate products at different levels, right? So I think part of differentiated assessment is to keep in mind the progress and have that in the rubric. You can have an element that is just for progress, right? And we have that in our rubrics. What else? Anything else about this specific area? Again, I talked to you about the videos from StarTalk. There is a unit, a module about differentiated assessment. So if you want to learn more about this specific approach, you can watch this video, which are short. Yes.
Does differentiated instruction and the way that the assignments are created, does that go across the whole semester? So for example, is there a holistic, at the end of the class, a student turns in, for example, like a portfolio, and that is what is used to assess the student for what?
Yes, for multi-level classes.
Yeah, so would that be something that, does it go across the whole semester, or is it mostly happening at each assignment?
Again, if you have a multi-level classroom, it will go along the whole semester, not just for one assignment. But you may need to do it for just one time. So, for example, when you teach written accents, that's a topic I'm interested in. And there's an article that is coming in Hispania at the end of the year that I wrote about written accents, the acquisition of written accents. Hispania. So, what happens is that after we teach the first time, let's say the stress syllable, half of the class already got it, and the other half, no clue. So, and like that. So, different students get it, and then others don't. So, after the first attempt, the first week, you do need to use differentiated instruction. And so, a group is going to be moving on and working on hiatos and diptongos, right? And the other group is going to continue to focus on stress syllable. And there may be times when we combine these students so that they help each other, but there also may be times when you do have to create different activities for the different groups and their mastery levels. Okay, so this is an example of an activity that you will do, that you will differentiate only in specific cases and not throughout the semester. Is that clear? Yes.
Yes, let's talk about differentiation. There is any research about a student, especially students that are included in Spanish class?
If there's any research on heritage learners that supports differentiation?
Yeah, that's because now I see that the schools are giving Spanish or foreign language for special students, special educational students.
For special needs.
Especially, this is especially all the students that they don't speak English very well. But there is another population that they speak English, they go here, but they have they are learning disability, and they are included in Spanish class.
Yes.
Sometimes.
I'm not aware of any. Yes.
Well, there's a book about bilingualism and disability, I think. And the conclusion is that it shouldn't, bilingualism is not a problem. It's not the problem. What I have experienced with my youngest son is that the teacher training in that area is inexistent. So the teachers don't know how to identify some of these needs or special accommodations or what to do with them. So the training, the question, I think it goes beyond languages, specific languages. It's a matter of training and understanding in a broader perspective those needs, and then how to incorporate a language component, but it's not the language per se, which is the issue.
Yes. So it will require some training on special needs, disabilities, and all that, in order to understand the students.
To work effectively with the students.
Okay, so now there's time for you to ask questions or make comments, not about this, but about anything else that you would like to ask. I think we have a few minutes, right? To ask questions, make comments, maybe posit problems. Yes. Yes. The book that I wrote about she's asking, sí, ya se está leyendo. The book, she wants to know. There's a question. Okay, so the book about heritage language teaching is called Heritage Language Teaching, Research and Practice. It is available through McGraw-Hill. It's not available in Amazon, so it's hard to find. So basically it's a create procedure, and so you order it and they create it for you. Heritage Language Teaching, Research and Practice. And then the other book that is a little more recent and is an edited book is called
Innovative Practices. No?
Yeah, do you have the title?
Yes.
They changed it so many times that I don't remember the title. Innovative Strategies for Heritage Language Teaching, Guidelines for the Classroom, something like that.
Can you repeat? If you put Sara Beaudrie, Innovative Heritage, you're going to get the title. It's not fast.
Yeah. Yes.
So we talked a lot today about teaching language to heritage speakers. Do you recommend I read something as I teach upper level college classes? They, in theory, have the level that they can be up here. how do I deal with that kind of students? With heritage students that are in more advanced classes, I'm not teaching language. But they must have special needs, there must be special strategies to deal with them. Do you know any research on that?
There's very little research about how students do in content classes. Basically, that's what you're asking. But I think all of these strategies work for that because you need to learn about them. You need to, let's say, differentiate instruction. You need to learn about the student diversity and the weaknesses and strengths. You could do a learning journal, for example, and focus on their language needs as they progress through the content in the course, which is actually what everybody should be doing, right? In content classes, also focus on language development. So, any other comment or question?
You know, how do you prepare? How do you prepare students for when they're going to travel? I suppose they're in university and they decide to travel, and they finally got to be in their heritage, country, and all of a sudden they're viewed as a the foreigners. They are not from there, and after having all of this positive, sometimes.
I think that we are going to go back to her attitude, and that's the attitude that I want the students to have when they are confronted with these comments. Oh, you don't speak Spanish, or, that's not true, correct Spanish, etc. If they believe in themselves and they value the language that they speak, they will be able to have those responses. Right? And I think that we need to acknowledge that and tell them about them, tell them what they might encounter, right? The comments that they may hear, and so that they can get ready with a response. So have a response handy right there for their parents, but not their parents. Sometimes they have relatives, right? That they will make these not so nice comments, right? By the way, do you know that the Heritage Language Journal is totally free and you just need to sign up? But it's Heritage Language Journal. So it has been created, it has been in existence for how many years? About 15, since 2003, more or less. And so there's a lot of research there. Some of it may not be interesting, but there will be some articles about heritage language instruction. So that's another resource that you have, and again, it's totally free. You don't need to buy it. Okay.
And it has about different languages. It's not just Spanish. Thank you.
And then, do you know about the Spanish Heritage Language Symposium? That's a conference, but it's just about heritage languages and it's just for Spanish. So typically when you go there, every presentation is very interesting, if you're in heritage languages, of course. Every year is in a different location, and next year is in Iowa. It's always about March, April. So it's a Spanish Heritage Language Symposium.
I was thinking Aruba.
It
moves. No way that you're working right now.
It moves.
What is it, neighbor?
Are you close to Iowa here?
No. We're super far. And it's really hard to get there. You have to take like 3 planes.
Okay, well, it changes location every year. So.
There's no direct flight from Boston. So
maybe I'll
go from here to Chicago.
No, yes, that's it. Okay. Any other questions, comments?
This has been wonderful.
Thank you.